So, Ilishnish said, how are we addressing the issue, precisely? We will speak to those responsible, Vltava replied. Ilishnish recalled the vast civilization hidden in the deepest valleys of the walled spine. Where would those responsible be in all of that? Those people have had no qualms driving out the countless tribes in their path, Ilishnish said. Roland Gork probably doesn't even mean any more to them than those tribes, less, considering they're not even competing for the same space. Outsiders are simply animals to be fenced out through the means they've been employing. What are the chances that some random strangers showing up telling them to stop will actually have them do so? A sense of foreboding fell over her in the silence that followed. The violent little thing was probably plotting violence. They emerged from the blizzard and left the canyon they had traveled down that morning. The snow burying the area had grown soft and heavy with the wintry weather now focused on the town further downriver. Ilishnish picked up the sounds of distant activity from the vicinity of the village ahead. Is it just me, Ilishnish said, or is this weather control magic different from what's being used back in the Sorcerer's Kingdom? It does seem that way, Pebble said. Leaving the effect to run its course is the usual method. It feels like a waste to do otherwise. What if it's a different spell entirely? Ilishnish asked. We have no idea what we're dealing with here. When it comes to tier magic, Pebble told her, one can gauge the strength of a caster based on the effect of their spells. Even if it's being facilitated by a ritual, we should still be facing a 4th-tier caster with a cadre of 3rd-tier followers at minimum. So we can just bully them into submission. As Vltava said, we should speak with them first. What if they don't listen? What is. She was fairly certain that meant bringing their opponent's civilization crashing down around their ears. Hopefully, they had some nice treasure for her to take home. The sound of activity grew louder as they came closer to the village. Once in a while, a strange trumpeting sound punctuated the general hubbub. They stopped in the shadows of an outcropping overlooking the valley, watching as scores of figures toiled below. Nearly all of them were the round, furry beings that she had observed during her flight over the nearby ranges. We'll wait here, Pebble said. Go and find out what you can from the people down there. Me? Ilishnish blinked. They'd probably attack the rest of us on sight. Oh, so it's perfectly fine to send me in on my own in that case, Ilishnish grumbled. Fine. How do I look? Appetizing, Pebble said. Flammable, said Vltava. Ilishnish pulled a mirror out of her bag. It was made for human hands, however, so all she could do was angle it atop her oversized palm as she examined herself. She had taken on what she thought was an average appearance based on the people working around the village. Her rotund, vaguely humanoid body was covered in a coat of long white hairs and 2 pairs of forward-pointing ribbed horns framed a black, ape-like face. Your eyes are the wrong color, Pinecone said. With a sigh, Ilishnish fixed her eye color. Maybe she could express herself in some other fashion. Your bags are out of place, too, Pebble noted. These people don't wear much and what they do is crudely fashioned. After several more rounds of criticism, Ilishnish waddled her way down the village. The people in the area didn't seem to pay her much mind, so she took her time trying to make sense of what they were doing. Everything was still buried under several meters of snow, but the village itself didn't seem to be the main focus of their labor. Most were digging up the corpses left behind by the conflict which primarily lay outside of the settlement's boundaries. Others loaded their excavated cargo onto huge sledges drawn by the same type of woolly behemoth she had observed the previous night. From the looks of it, they were scavenging meat for delivery to the inner ranges. You. A guttural voice snapped at her, I'm not paying you people to just stand around. The source of the voice was a fellow standing on one of the sledges. Unlike the people around him, he wore a mantle of furs with several necklaces of polished stone beads layered atop them. Ilishnish bobbed her head and scurried away from the loading area. You. A voice called out to her from the side, come. Ilishnish changed direction, waddling over to join one of the furballs in his snowy trench. Snow wet, he said as he gestured to a Haugral leg sticking out of the snow. Heavy. You help. She made a show of clearing the snow around the corpse before helping to yank it out. They tossed it over the top of the trench and a pair of laborers came over to drag it away. The furball plopped himself onto the ground. You knew. I come from a peak to the northwest, Elishnish replied. This strange weather we've been having made me curious enough to come out and see what was going on. The furball frowned at her response. Maybe she needed to simplify her speech. Far tribes? The furball slapped his big belly twice in an unknown gesture. Why you here? You not know? Easterners come. Easterners? How far east? Plateau. Great Mammoth Steppe. You know? I don't. How far? Very far. Many mountains. Overseer from there. You mean the proud one with the beads? Yeah. Him. He doesn't look strong enough to rule to me, Elishnish said. If you're dissatisfied with his leadership, why not get rid of him? The furball shook his head. Easterners come. Say make things better. Overseer come help. Help how? Make like them. Great nation. Solidarity. All Yeti, unite. A spray of wet snow fell upon them. Number 16, where's the next load? We're not paying you to sleep in there. 16. With a drawn-out sigh, the Yeti turned back to dig out the next corpse. Elishnish joined him in his search, though it was a trivial matter for her. After they tossed the next corpse out of the trench, she bade number 16 to sit and rest while she continued digging. It was a bit nostalgic. When she was younger, it would take several sittings for her to finish eating her kills, so she'd end up burying them in the snow somewhere for later. That overseer said pay, Elishnish said. 50 carcasses. Get food for day. Elishnish's claws stopped as she calculated the value of Yeti labor. How long does that take? 1 day, number 16 replied. 1 day work. 1 day food. Fair. Even a common warehouse worker in the Baharuth Empire earned more than that. Were these people tricked into toiling for so little? Regardless, it sounded like the Baharuth Empire had some catching up to do. Just to be certain, Elishnish said, was this area was once the territory of your tribe? Close. Valley. 2-day walk. I see. So this solidarity came along and took the territory that your tribe depended on for their survival. Then, they offered you this work in exchange. Number 16 shook his head. No, yes. No. Easterners help. Snows come. Rivals gone. Make better take time, they say. In many tomorrows, become better. Elishnish pulled another corpse out of the snow and tossed it out of the trench. How long have the Easterners been here? She asked. Many seasons, number 16 answered. First, some come. Talk only. Learn. Then, more come. Bring great snows. Kill enemies. After, other Yeti come. Like overseer. From company. What's a company? The Yeti shrugged. Like tribe? Maybe. Since it didn't seem like she would get much useful information about the Easterners that had come and taken over the western extremes of the walled spine, Elishnish decided to inquire about the local Yeti society of the past. Unfortunately, she couldn't say there was much that was interesting about them. Simply put, they were a society of mostly solitary predators who were loosely organized into tribes. Each tribe was little more than a breeding population dominated by its strongest members. Individual Yeti got together once every few years to mate and stuck to their own hunting ranges the rest of the time. It was a telltale characteristic of powerful predatory species in cold, highly competitive climates. The real question was how the Easterners made the jump from that natural state to what she had seen further along the walled spine. Sorry to burden you with so many questions, Elishnish said. It's just all so new to me. You smell nice, number 16 gave her a toothy grin. Me happy. Elishnish scurried out of the trench when the Yeti pointed his happiness at her. Why did mortals have to be like that? She had excavated enough corpses to earn both herself and number 16 a day's worth of rations. Curious about what she would receive, Ilishnish joined the Yeti laborers queued up at one of the massive sledges piled high with Haugrul remains. The other Yeti in the area sent many glances her way, but she found that no one else was as talkative as number 16, at least until she reached the head of the line. You're the one from before. The overseer hopped off of his sledge to land in front of her. Ilishnish leaned back slightly as he closely scrutinized her. Yes. You will make for an excellent tribute. Me? Indeed, the overseer's nostrils flared as he took in a deep whiff of her coat. An exotic young female such as yourself would be the envy of the Crag Council. We must deliver you to the capital post-haste. Me just here for food. Nonsense, the overseer snorted. A tribute of your quality can have all the food you could desire. You two, help her into the cabin. Two large, heavy-set Yeti came to escort her onto the vehicle. It seemed that the overseer wouldn't take no for an answer. Rather than protest the one-sided treatment, however, Ilishnish was content to watch them prepare her seat as she pondered what sort of information she might be able to gain. Pelts were piled high upon a broad pine bench offering a view over the mammoth's shoulder. Her escorts urged her to take a seat while they delivered choice cuts of meat on a polished granite platter. The sledge itself was only superficially similar to those employed by the Azalisian mountain dwarves. Instead of steel, the Yeti vehicle was fashioned out of some kind of wood and had a closed cabin that shielded its passengers from the elements. The same type of ice that she saw used in the city far to the east formed a dome over the spacious interior, offering a clear view of their surroundings in all directions. Ilishnish settled onto her seat to sample the fare set out before her. The cabin rocked slightly as the overseer came up to join her. "Ah, I see you've made yourself comfortable," he said. "Good. It will be a long trip to Rigel." "Rigel? What's that?" "It is the name of our great capital," the overseer told her. "It is not the only place of note, however. Along the way, you will see many wondrous places that you'll never think to look back on the life you had here. Life here not bad." The overseer let out a hearty chuckle, slapping his belly several times. She still wasn't quite sure what the gesture meant. "You will see, dear miss," he said with a sweep of his hand. "A whole new world awaits you, a shining civilization of shimmering spires. I wager that you will need no convincing about where you'd rather be once you partake of its offerings." Ilishnish had to admit that she was tempted to see what the offerings were. Most of what she had seen from her reconnaissance flight consisted of food and basic materials being transported from one place to another. The shining city she had encountered was protected from her prying, so she was certain that there was something nice for her inside. The cabin shuddered slightly as the carriage got underway. Ilishnish shifted uncomfortably at the unfamiliar sensation. "Worry not," the overseer said. "Our sledges are the finest in the world. Not only is it covered by this dome of enchanted ice, but the entire vehicle is a marvel of magical artifice. Only the most prosperous merchants in the realm can afford them." "Me not understand," Ilishnish said, "but sound good. How many you have?" "Our company owns a vast fleet of them. Hundreds of sledges, many of them finer than this. We've even transported members of the Crag Council on many occasions. Our first stop will be a small city about 2 weeks from here where such a carriage will deliver you to the core provinces." Ilishnish turned her gaze to the roadside. Based on the road network she had seen and the plodding pace of their transportation, 2 weeks' travel would have them arrive at the city she had flown over before returning to Rolengork. "And that's what they consider a small city? How far is the, Rigel?" That would depend on the main caravan's route," the overseer said. "If I were to guess, a bit over a year. Ah, but set your fears aside, you will not want for anything during the journey and your treatment in the capital will be even more exquisite." Ilishnish considered her options. She was pretty sure she could escape at any point since the guards assigned to the sledge weren't much better than the warriors of Rolengork in terms of raw strength. Of course, what she had seen of their country suggested that they were far more advanced than Rolengork, but there was only so much that equipment and techniques could do without the strength to back it up. Unless some sort of Yeti hero appeared, it was probably safe for her to do whatever she pleased. Since Yeti appeared to be limited to regular dark vision, Elishnish kept any questions about their surroundings to herself until dawn. Unfortunately, the overseer seemed so completely intent on impressing her with all manner of bombastic claims that she wondered whether even a fraction of it could be believed. Is it even prudent to boast so grandly? Very little of what she had seen so far suggested that they were capable of defending themselves against anything truly powerful. Whispering sweet nothings into the ears of random dragons would surely invite an unwelcome investigation of their transferable assets. You say your country rich, Elishnish said as she watched the scenery go by outside of the cabin, but these warbands, weak. Tribes come attack. Warbands. The overseer chuckled in amusement. The warbands that you see here are merely security guards for the industrial operations opening up on the frontier. Our country does not use warbands like the ancestors of old. We have a true, professional army that safeguards the realm. This, too, is something you will see on your journey. Elishnish stared blankly at the overseer as he provided yet another prideful answer to her seeming ignorance. Going by her discussion with number 16, the local Yeti were far less sophisticated than even the beastmen of Roland Gork, and the overseer certainly didn't hold back about the superiority of his vaunted solidarity. He offered her a toothy smile at what he probably thought was her awestruck reaction to his words. This army? Elishnish asked, they must fight many raids. Get many wounds. How heal? Through our fine clergy, of course, the overseer answered. See clergy? I suppose you'd refer to them as mystics or maybe priests. Me see, Elishnish said. The overseer gave her a look. Are you feeling unwell? Whether strange, Elishnish replied. Cursed. Barking laughter from the overseer filled the cabin. Rest assured, no curse has fallen upon the land. The source of the unusual weather is none other than a group of our finest clergy. They've been hard at work expanding the reach of the wall spine. Me not understand. The overseer's face twitched and he fell silent for several moments. After scanning the road ahead, he descended to open the cabin door and spoke with the driver. Stop at the next camp, the overseer pointed to a cluster of buildings in the shadow of a sheer cliff. We'll be there for at least a few hours, so check over the sledge before going for lunch. Let the rest of the staff know. Rather than return to sit beside her, the overseer went to rummage through several cabinets, pulling out several leather bags and searching through them. What you do? Elishnish asked. I have to get you familiarized with some things, he said. As exotic as you may be, your ignorance of our country and its customs will tarnish the perception of our patrons. This is no fault of yours, of course. You are simply the product of your circumstances, and I'm confident you'll learn quickly. What is he basing that assessment on? Regardless of race, it seemed that merchants tended to resort to the same bag of tricks. They constantly pushed to get what they wanted, employing a mix of good and bad impressions, flattery, and vague pseudo-promises to erode their target's ability to resist them. The overseer already treated it as a given that she was some form of merchandise meant to be shipped to the heart of his civilization and that it was by her own will. After cloaking Elishnish in a heavy mantle of layered furs, the overseer led her into the camp. The place was reminiscent of the work camps that humans set up along their frontiers, save for the fact that every structure was constructed from ice and packed snow. With the temperatures in the mountains as they were, she suspected that the Yeti had a far easier time expanding than most with their near-infinite supply of convenient building material. As they walked through rows of utilitarian dwellings on their way to a core of much larger structures, Elishnish took an inventory of the camp's contents. Every cube-like ice hut had space for one or two Yeti, though the second spot seemed exclusively reserved for their young. Personal belongings were scarce, though those that did exist were quite distinct. Elishnish gestured at a stone axe hanging from the belt of a passing worker. What is that? She asked. That? The overseer frowned as he turned to see what she was referring to. Those are axes. Tools. Surely you've seen something like them before. Invaders come with fangs of wood and bone and stone, Elishnish replied. But not same. Indeed, the overseer nodded, they are not the crude implements that you have seen brandished by savages in the wilds. Of course, they may be used as weaponry, but they are mostly employed as vocational implements. That fellow just now was one of the masons who built the structures you see around us. Our people have long left behind the solitary lives of our ancestors, coming together to build the great civilization that dominates the Great Ranges. Ilishnish made a show of looking about in wonderment while they made their way to a gigantic ice dome in the center of the camp. Its translucent walls shimmered with the same cold light that she had seen in the city deeper in the walled spine, painting the interior and its occupants in shades of pale blue. This is the local temple, the overseer told her in a low voice. The workers and locals come to have their spiritual and medical needs met here. Be sure to treat the staff with respect. Staff? Those who work here, like him. A well-groomed yeti adorned in an indecipherable array of accessories waddled up to them. The beads, polished stones, and precious gems dangling from his horns and neck clattered lightly as he tilted his rotund body in what probably counted as a yeti bow. "Yonton," he said in modulated tones. "You are back, I have the great spirits to thank for that, Brother Jola," the overseer replied as he touched his lower lip. "How have things been since we last spoke?" "Quiet, as usual. Who is this lovely young lady?" Yonton opened his mouth and closed it again. Ilishnish had purposely avoided naming herself, as she wasn't sure how Yeti names worked. She had planned on hanging around here and there to listen in on discussions between Yeti, but she had been diverted by the prospect of better information about the Yeti invaders from the overseer. "Me Winter Moon," Ilishnish gestured at herself. The overseer treated her as a primitive, so maybe it would work out. "Winter Moon." The ornately adorned Yeti mulled over the words. "How quaint. I've heard that the people here possess no formal language, never mind a writing system. I guess that turned out to be true." Ilishnish breathed an internal sigh of relief. She was hoping things would play out like that. The mysterious way in which words were translated between people had the effect of blocking linguistic development. This resulted in a pattern of speech that humans tended to associate with goblins, but the fact of the matter was that it could happen with any race born without innate linguistic knowledge. People could communicate with one another without ever learning how to speak a language, so it was often the case that primitive and isolated societies, or those that lost their language somehow, spoke in a direct and literal way and never progressed beyond that. With how she had to travel far and wide as an agent of the Ministry of Transportation, Ilishnish made it a point to study the translation phenomenon and its effects. She was still far from completely understanding how it worked, but she already had the sneaking suspicion that it was the result of someone using too much power with too little thought. "She's more clever than most," Yonton said. "I figured it wouldn't hurt to educate her on our customs before delivering her to the capital." "I see. That seems prudent. We don't have the appropriate facilities for that here, but I can recommend you to a temple in Kala." "I'd appreciate that." The overseer reached up with both hands to remove one of his necklaces. He undid its leather thong and counted out 10 polished pieces of blue jade, which he dropped into a stone bowl sitting on a pillar of ice. "Nice necklace broken," Ilishnish cried in distraught tones. Jotun and the other Yeti exchanged a look. "It isn't a necklace," Jotun said as he held up the strand of polished stones. "It's just a way to hold coins. Coins are, how can I explain that? They're a form of treasure used for trade." "Trade?" The two Yeti looked helplessly at one another. Ilishnish pondered the existence of the jade coins. Did it mean that the merchant guild didn't exist in their civilization? No, human countries mint coins of their own as well. Then again, the way that these Yeti expand pretty much isolates them from the outside world. It was an intriguing scenario. According to multiple sources, the Merchant Guild was responsible for introducing, and reintroducing, commerce worldwide. If the Yeti had built their own economic systems from the ground up, they potentially possessed a depth that was lacking in most of the places she had visited so far. In the human realms, Nearly everything felt like a copy of a copy of a copy that people gave little thought to. Let's leave the complicated subjects aside for now, Brother Jola said in a welcoming tone as he gestured to the temple's interior. First, we should cover the basics. Ngolngor. Ngolngor. Shanao. Shanao. Dole. Dole. Ngolngor. Shanao. Dole. Who's strongest? Brother Jola chuckled gently, gesturing to the three main pillars of the temple. Each represented one of the Yeti gods and each bore engravings of their respective iconographies. Our gods are equally powerful, he told her. Ngolngor is the heart of stone. Shanao is the shield of ice. Dole is the sentinel wind. Together, they are the gods who rule over the mountains, the gods that preside over every aspect of our people's lives. They were in a temple, so she should have expected her education to start with something like this. When she was investigating the Baharuth Empire, it was much the same. She had entered temples on several occasions and the staff would always happily welcome her before asserting that their gods were her gods. The lore behind those gods felt fairly slipshod, however. Lady Zaradnik said it was the result of them breaking off from the faith of the Sikhs and replacing everything that they didn't like about it with feel-good nonsense. Ngolngor. Shanao. Dole. Winter moon sea? But of course. Jola answered, in Rigel, their majesty may be seen by all, their might, felt by all. Well, that's different. Priests she had spoken with in the past usually answered that question by claiming their gods ruled from some divine realm and that their agents in the mortal realm spoke with their authority or some such. She had never seen a god before, so she made a mental note to take a look at some point. Other gods? God of beast. God of fire. Jola's expression turned dark at her query. Fire is the great enemy, he told her. Any being who claims kinship to fire can be no god of ours. Every flame must be stamped out immediately upon notice. You must keep the great enemy from your words and thoughts, lest it consume you where you stand. Scary. Ilishnish cried, this country, no fi? Indeed, any trace of the great enemy is prohibited in this realm. Outsiders often think to bring the great enemy to bear against us, but all who attempt to do so are extinguished without mercy. Ice good? Elemental? Dragon? Elementals are elementals and act as elementals will. As for ice dragons, have you seen these creatures? Legend. Ilishnish put some conviction into her response. I'm sure that the people in the capital would appreciate what you can share, even if they are just legends. The existence of challengers to our domain cannot be tolerated. What an unpleasant fellow. Speaking of unpleasant fellows. Challenger bad, Ilishnish nodded to herself. Frost giant bad? I've never heard of them before, the Yeti priest said. What are they like? Frost giant scary. Big weapon. Big angry. Big warband come raid big raid. They're coming in force, wind say yes. Frost giant tribes escape. Warpath now. At her every word, Jola's expression turned increasingly grave. What of their weaknesses? He asked. Even the mightiest magical beast may be felled by unrelenting exposure to the frozen winds. Frost giant is frost giant, Ilishnish answered. Cold no hurt. Snow, fog no blind. You make it sound as if the effort of our stormcasters won't deter them. Stormcaster? What that? The Yeti priest looked up at three elemental gods, who frowned down at them sternly. They are the adepts of Chanao and Dole, he said as he made a ritual gesture. It is our stormcasters who bring the blessing of the mountain to the frontier. This is troublesome information. It must be by the grace of the gods that you have come to us, Wintermoon. Your knowledge of the lands beyond our borders will undoubtedly prove critical to the future of the Yeti nation. Ilishnish silently followed the Yeti priest around as he resumed lecturing her on the religion of the Solidarity. As far as she could tell, it was a faith that had its roots in the Druidic traditions of tribal mysticism. The Solidarity was a stronghold of three elements, which were represented by a triumvirate of elemental gods. With the rise of the Yeti nation, An organized religion has formed around them, one which curiously eschewed conventional druidic notions of elemental balance. As Jola went on about the mandate of the gods for the solidarity, Ilishnish nudged him in a direction that was more relevant to her interests. "My home, change?" she asked. "Of course," Jola answered. "All must change, for the mountain must reign over all. By the will of the gods, the great enemy will be extinguished from the world so that we may enter a blessed age of eternal ice." "Sound good. When do?" "I am far from worthy to decipher the designs of deities," the Yeti priest replied. "Practically speaking, the Solidarity is first focusing on transforming its mountain frontiers before exerting its influence upon less desirable areas." "East Yeti not like West Yeti. How so different?" Jola chuckled in amusement. "You are not the first to bring this up," he said. "Nor will you be the last, I suspect. A very long time ago, the Yeti tribe that would give rise to the Solidarity was not so different from the ones you might find around here. We were content to live our lives in harmony with our little part of the world, but all that changed when the great enemy sent his followers against us." "Phi great enemy attack?" "A nation of fire," Jola intoned. "Of ash and smoke and molten metal. They came with their burning legions, stripping the mountains bare and leveling mighty peaks in their desire to consume all. None could stand against them. Our people could only flee deeper into the ranges of the walled spine, facing all manner of mortal peril. It was there that we found the gods, and it was there that the Solidarity was born." "Fire Nation, what happened?" "We drove them out. Many generations after our homes were stolen, we returned to destroy the invaders. We stamped out their fires and buried their screaming hordes in ice. The few who survived fled back to the pits of accursed glass that they spawned from." "Scary," Ilishnish said. "Enemy, what tribe? Ogre? Beastman?" "There were many different races," Jola told her. "But all bore the marks of their fiery masters. They hated us just as surely as fire hates ice, burning young and old alike. The world beyond the mountain is a terrible place, Wintermoon. Our great Solidarity exists so that the atrocities of the past may never again be visited upon our people." As far as national narratives went, it was more compelling than most. Most places she had visited had systems that hinged on belief in divine or tribal precedents. Without an external threat that faced the whole, gazes turned inward and competition for limited resources became rampant. Come to think of it, this Solidarity sort of sounds like the slain theocracy. "Gods bless Yeti?" Ilishnish asked. "Have strong children? Champion?" "The Solidarity has many champions," Jola answered. "With looks like yours, I'm sure you'll attract their attention. Indeed, I expect that you'll give birth to many strong offspring." "That's not what I was asking." Ilishnish concealed her disappointment at the priest's unsatisfactory answer. With his claim that their gods existed amongst them, she was hoping to find out if the Solidarity possessed any strong individuals that might qualify as godkin, demigods, or something similar. After being subjected to over an hour of Jola's religious instruction, Jotun reappeared to check up on her. He had disappeared to attend to some business, but she suspected that he had simply fled the temple to avoid Jola's dogmatic lectures. Ilishnish brightened upon his entrance and greeted him with an innocent smile. "Jotun. Business, good?" "Nothing is amiss on my end, my dear," Jotun replied. "How is your lesson with Brother Jola going?" "Many new things," Ilishnish replied. "Ngolngor. Shanao. Dole. Great enemy." "If I didn't know any better," Jotun peered at the priest, "I'd think you're trying to steal her for the temples." "That isn't a bad idea now that you mention it," Jola said. "You were right about her being more than she seems. Her linguistic background is primitive, but she can understand my words well enough. It's to the point where she can ask questions as I speak on different topics." "Me like learn," Ilishnish said. "Like travel. See new things." Jola released a wistful sigh. "If only you had been born in the Solidarity," he said. "You would have undoubtedly received the finest education from childhood and become one of the great sages of our time. Cannot now. Don't let this mangy old ape discourage you, Jotun said. You are still young, your beauty and intelligence will take you far. Did you just call me a mangy old ape? Jola narrowed his eyes. You are not? Jotun replied. The two Yeti glared at one another before their threatening expressions broke and they shared a friendly laugh. Jola turned to regard Ilishnish. Forgive me, Winter Moon, the priest said, I spoke in haste. Jotun is likely correct. If you apply yourself well, you may yet earn a place of honor among our people. Speaking of places of honor, Jotun said, you didn't tell me that Warlord Korol was on his way. I wasn't aware that he was, Jola replied. It's not as if he answers to me. The only time I learn about his comings and goings is when the Stormcaster team comes in from an assignment. Any time else, he's out doing whatever warlords do. This isn't good, the overseer said. Winter Moon and I need to get out of here before Korol and his officers catch a whiff of her. Of course, Jola nodded. You should be safe when you reach the temple in Kala if he tries to give you trouble outside of his jurisdiction. May Dol grant you swiftness. Jotun took her by the hand and they swiftly waddled out of the temple. Along the streets of packed snow, it looked like the camp's denizens were readying storefronts and stalls, all made out of ice, for business. Their lively activities stood in stark contrast to the overseer, whose shoulders were hunched in worry. Cover yourself with your mantle, Jotun said. We don't want any of Korol's people noticing you. Korol bad? Ilishnish asked. That depends on whom you ask, the overseer answered. Anyone who earns the position of warlord isn't incompetent, but powers everything to his type. Out here on the frontier, that can lead to some overreach. Jotun protect Winter Moon. Of course, my dear. We just need to get to the sledge and be on our way and Korol will be none the wiser. They squeezed their way between the rows of ice huts, tracing a zigzagging course out of the camp. Ultimately, however, the overseer's efforts to elude detection proved futile. Upon entering the lot where their sledge was parked, they found a contingent of Yeti surrounding it. A pair patrolling the perimeter spotted them lurking in the shadow of a nearby building. You there, one of them called out, what are you skulking around for? Jotun stepped out in front of Ilishnish. Skulking? He said in incensed tones, that's my sledge you people are crowding around. Who gave you permission to unload my cargo? Warlord Korol. This way. Wait. I didn't. At a gesture from the patrol, two Yeti from the contingent came and took Jotun by the arms. They dragged him off toward the sledge amidst his protests, bringing him before an especially large Yeti frowning down at a tablet made of ice. The big Yeti didn't look up from his reading, but no one dared to interrupt him. Overseer Jotun, he said after a minute. I noticed you came in with a shipment, so I decided to save you some time by having the troops offload everything. I appreciate your consideration, Warlord, Jotun bobbed his head in reply, but my cargo is meant for Kala. We were just about to depart. Kala? The Warlord finally looked up from his tablet. That's highly irregular. Why would unprocessed salvage be delivered directly to Kala? Highly inefficient, don't you agree? I'm simply following my instructions, Jotun said. It's not my place to question company orders. Ah, but it is mine, Korol said as he gestured to his nearby troops. Double-check the cargo. We wouldn't want anything strange making its way into the city. Jotun opened his mouth as if to protest, but then settled into a resigned silence. His reaction reminded Ilishnish a bit of Zushiru, whose wagons were often subjected to routine inspections by customs officers in the Baharuth Empire to make sure the diminutive demi-human merchant wasn't transporting anything weird into their cities. Based on Jotun's feelings about the warlord, however, Ilishnish suspected that things wouldn't go very smoothly here. Let's take a look at this order of yours, Korol held out his hand. They were verbal instructions, Jotun replied. Nothing out of the ordinary, I assure you. The company simply wishes to ensure that our teams are efficiently processing salvage, and aren't stealing anything. To that end, they wanted a shipment of unprocessed goods. The warlord's gaze went from Jotun to Ilishnish. "Can you confirm your employer's claim?" he asked, then frowned. "Actually, aren't you a bit too well dressed for a laborer? Remove your hood." "She is my guest," Jotun said as he shifted closer to Ilishnish. "How much longer will you be delaying us?" "If we requisition the cargo you're supposedly delivering," Karol replied, "then you won't have a shipment to delay. Why are you in such a hurry to leave?" "Even if I have no cargo, I still have a report to make to my superiors. My company won't be pleased by your actions." "Then it's a good thing that I don't answer to your company. Need I remind you who issues your license to operate on the frontier?" Jotun once again fell into a sullen silence. The warlord addressed Ilishnish again. "And you, are you deaf? I ordered you to remove your hood." Ilishnish hesitantly pulled back her hood. A low murmur rose from the crowd of soldiers. My, warlord Karol waddled forward, examining Ilishnish up and down. "What do we have here? I smell the female, but this guest of yours is clearly above your station, Jotun." "You misunderstood my meaning, warlord," Jotun said. "I am merely delivering her as tribute to the capital." "Tribute?" Karol barked out a laugh. "Those corpulent counselors in the capital don't deserve anything so fine. It is we who are carving out new frontiers for the solidarity. The conquerors should be first to the spoils." "Conquerors?" Jotun spat. "Ever since you were bloodied by those beastmen last year, you've been letting the Stormcasters do all of the work for you. Some warlord you are." Karol's backhand sent the 3-meter-tall overseer spinning through the air to crash headfirst into the ice. Ilishnish let out a terrified shriek and fled. "Seize her!" the warlord shouted. Bowling an entire contingent of Yeti over would probably invite unwelcome suspicion. She waddled into the wall of soldiers behind her and made a show of struggling as they brought her back before the warlord. "No!" she cried. "Jotun! Jotun! Bad Yeti kill Jotun. Me go home." "A local?" Karol murmured. "Well, no matter. Forget about that sleazy overseer, you're my guest now." "No. No want. Bad Yeti bad. Bad. What in the name of the gods is going on here?" Brother Jola's voice thundered through the air. The soldiers cleared a path as the Yeti priest walked through the crowd with a half-dozen other Yeti in temple garb. An annoyed expression flashed across the warlord's face before he performed one of the respectful gestures Ilishnish had been shown early in Jola's instruction. "The Stormcasters mentioned that you were requisitioning supplies from company inventories, Warlord Karol," Brother Jola said. "But this shipment is hardly fit for consumption. Why did you not present your needs to the magistrate? It isn't as if we're short on food." "I was on my way to do just that, Brother Jola," the warlord replied. "But then I noticed how irregular this sledge's cargo was. Overseer Jotun obstructed us in our duties with some highly suspicious behavior." As the warlord spoke, one of the Stormcasters went over to tend to Jotun. Barely a moment passed until he looked over at Jola and shook his head. "He's dead," he said. "I regret that it has come to this," Karol said, "but I acted within the scope of my duties. I'll put in a request with his company for a replacement when I have the time." Jola didn't say anything in response, but it was clear he didn't approve of the warlord's conduct. With what Karol has just done to the Jotun, however, Ilishnish figured it was prudent for lesser beings to keep their opinions to themselves before the towering Yeti. She felt a touch against her palm as the priest reached out to take her hand. Karol didn't miss the movement. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Winter Moon is clearly distraught," Jola replied. "I'm bringing her back to the temple." "We've finished resupplying," one of the Stormcasters added. "It's time we move on to the next ritual site." "But my troops haven't had a chance to resupply yet," Karol said. "Then I suggest that they hurry," the Stormcaster told him. "Once the company warehouses catch wind of what happened with the overseer, I doubt they'll be very generous with your provisions." The soldiers started to disperse, leaving the warlord with little choice but to give way to the Stormcaster's initiative. Ilishnish pondered what she had learned from the interaction. There were likely a few core similarities between Yeti society and that of other tribal groups. Like many tribes, their warrior class deferred to the priesthood while having de facto power over everyone else. Apparently, even murder was allowed so long as a nominally acceptable justification was provided. She hadn't been familiarized with the laws of the Solidarity, so she couldn't tell how far the warlord was stretching with his authority. As it was the frontier, however, the power of the military likely far eclipsed that of any other institution. Though many countries claimed to be civilized, the wilderness was always a place where might made right and civilization existed according to the whims of the strong. Jola stopped just inside the entrance of the temple, where he placed his hands on Ilishnish's shoulders. "I'm sorry you had to experience all that, Winter Moon," Jola said. "Please believe me when I say that things usually aren't like this in the Solidarity. Karol's made a name for himself with how quickly he's risen in his career, but the same qualities that drove that rise come with a number of problems. Bad Yeti, no kill." No kill? If you're asking if he'll be punished for his actions, it's vexing to admit that it isn't likely. Talent and success turned the eyes of the people from any number of indiscretions. So far from the capital, it isn't likely that the warlord will become an inconvenience to his backers. Well, that's as common a story as there ever was. Such stories usually had those sorts of characters meet with violent ends. Given the apparent scope of his responsibilities, Ilishnish was almost certain that it would also be the case with Karol. "Winter Moon sad," she sniffled. "Go home." "Are you certain?" Jola asked. "As we mentioned before, someone like you would surely be welcomed in lofty circles. Or you could study in the temples since you love to learn. Go home." With that, she turned and shuffled away. The shuffle turned into a waddle, and the waddle took her out of the town and behind the debris of a nearby rockfall. She carefully scanned her surroundings before becoming her regular self and taking wing. Now, where have those stormcasters gone? Ilishnish located her targets as she made a pass high above the work camp. It looked like they were still waiting for their escort to resupply. She winged over the nearby ranges as she awaited their departure, familiarizing herself with the landscape. The entire area was icebound and the roads leading further into the mountains followed a winding course near the peaks to avoid crevasses and other glacial hazards. Traffic was sparse, but consistent, with sledges bringing goods from hundreds of valleys leading up from the lowlands. Now that she understood what she was looking at, she realized that the Yeti were extracting resources not just from the southern slopes of the walled spine, but in every direction that they considered their frontier. By the time the warlord looked about ready to set off, Ilishnish had also located the Kronos. The three had taken refuge behind a small peak near the camp, out of sight of those below. She alighted before them to offer an update. "Me back," she said. "Go now." Vltava peered up at her with a disgusted look. "Have you somehow become even stupider, you stupid lizard?" "Ahem. I have returned. Is everyone fit to travel?" "You've identified our quarry?" Pinecone asked. "Indeed," Ilishnish answered. "There is a group amongst the Yeti clergy referred to as Stormcasters. They use ritual magic at certain sites to deploy some form of weather control magic." "How many of these Stormcasters are there?" "I only saw a handful. The priest I spoke with made it sound as if there was only a single team of them operating in the region." "And you mentioned that they were members of the Yeti clergy." "That's right." The Krokonos shared a knowing look between themselves. "This explains much," Pebble flicked an ear. "Rather than a corrupted druid, we are dealing with an urban priesthood. They are bound to the values of their society rather than to the balance of nature." "It may not be as straightforward as that," Ilishnish said. "They claim to worship 3 elemental gods. One of earth, one of ice, and one of wind. While this pantheon of theirs is somewhat bland for an alpine civilization, they also claim that these gods exist among them. In a literal sense. What have you learned about these elemental gods?" "Not much of use. A disruptive event in the distant past drove the Yeti deep into the walled spine, which was where they first encountered their gods. Their religion labels fire as the great enemy and they seek to extinguish it from the world. Oh, and these gods supposedly reside in their far-off capital. Strange, Pinecone said. A being of pure elemental energy with the intelligence and will to communicate with others is exceedingly rare. The formation of a triumvirate should be next to impossible. A sign of the times, perhaps. Even so, Pebble said, we can only play our part. Ilishnesh looked back and forth between the Krokonos. I don't like where this is going, she said. What is? Pebble and Pinecone put their things away while Vltava scaled the nearby rocks to look over the valley. The work camp was situated across the icefield from them, roughly 5 kilometers distant. From what she could see, the Stormcaster party was only beginning to make their way down the ice road that the Overseer's sledge had arrived on. Wherever they're going, Ilishnesh said, it's going to take them a while to waddle there. Should we just speak with them on the road? They were just pummeling Grokler's forces the other day with a blizzard, Pinecone said from below. Their destination probably isn't very far. I suppose that makes sense. Over the remainder of the evening, they traveled parallel to the Stormcasters as they descended one of the glaciers flowing from the icefield. Eventually, their quarry scaled a steep gully which led to a rocky ridge leading to a peak overlooking the forested highlands to the south. The people of Rolengork truly had no chance of knowing they were being targeted from such a distance. What now? Ilishnesh asked. Most of the soldiers look like they've been stationed to guard the land approach, Pinecone said. Flying threats are scarce around here, Ilishnesh said. Never mind a rock, I haven't seen a single giant eagle. The people I spoke with aren't familiar with frost dragons, either. They are probably in a similar situation as Rolengork, Pinecone mused. To protect their livestock, they've eliminated or driven away most of the native predators, including competing races. Does that mean it's safe or unsafe to approach them from above? Ilishnesh asked. How would we know that? You're the one observing their behavior up close. As far as she could tell, the Yeti weren't at all wary of aerial threats. Generally speaking, surface dwellers didn't even look up unless they felt actively under threat from the skies like the beastmen fighting along the Yorgulan frontier. It's probably safe enough, Ilishnesh said. There's a belligerent fellow named Kurol commanding the Yeti soldiers blocking the path, so avoiding his contingent would be prudent if we're to discuss anything. Then our path is decided, Pinecone said. Our path and theirs. Given the broad attitudes of the Yeti Solidarity's members, Ilishnesh had little doubt that they weren't going to be happy about what the Kronos had to say. Hopefully, there would be something left to recover from them afterwards.